You want to know what rock bottom looks like? It's kneeling on your kitchen floor at 2 a.m., clutching your husband's leg while he stares down at you with pure disgust. It's hearing the man who once called you his soulmate use a word so degrading that it cuts deeper than any divorce papers ever could. Let me tell you exactly how I went from being someone's beloved wife to whatever I am now. It wasn't supposed to happen. God, that sounds so cliché, doesn't it? But it's true. I wasn't some serial cheater or marriage wrecker. I was just invisible. At least that's how I felt in my own home. David and I had been together for 12 years, married for 8. We had this beautiful routine: morning coffee together, Sunday farmers markets, date nights every other Friday. But somewhere in year 6, the routine became a prison. He'd come home from his accounting job, grunt hello, and disappear into his home office until dinner. During dinner, he'd scroll through his phone while I talked about my day at the marketing firm. I started feeling like a ghost in my own marriage. When I'd try to initiate intimacy, he'd mumble something about being tired or having an early meeting. When I suggested we take a weekend trip, he'd say we couldn't afford it, then spend $300 on a new fishing rod the next week. That's when Jake started working in our office. Fresh out of college, ambitious, with this infectious laugh that made everyone gravitate toward him. But more importantly, he listened to me. Really listened. When I'd share ideas in meetings, he'd build on them, give me credit. When I looked frustrated, he'd ask what was wrong. It started innocently enough. Coffee breaks turned into lunch meetings. Lunch meetings turned into drinks after work. I told myself it was just friendship, just someone who valued my thoughts and opinions. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The first time Jake kissed me was after a company happy hour. I'd had 2 glasses of wine, just enough to lower my inhibitions. We were in the parking lot, and he said something about how my husband was lucky to have someone so brilliant and beautiful. Before I knew it, his lips were on mine, and instead of pulling away, I kissed him back. I drove home that night with my heart racing, telling myself it was a mistake. But the next day, I found myself putting on makeup with more care, wearing the dress that made me feel confident. When Jake suggested we grab dinner to talk about what happened, I said yes. For 3 months, I lived a double life. I'd tell David I was working late or meeting girlfriends for drinks. He never questioned it, never seemed to care enough to be suspicious. Part of me wanted him to ask, to show some sign that he'd notice if I disappeared completely. Jake made me feel alive again. He'd send me texts throughout the day telling me how amazing I was. He'd remember details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier. When we were together, I felt like the most important person in the world. It was intoxicating, addictive. I convinced myself that David and I had grown apart naturally, that maybe this was just how marriages ended, not with fights or drama, but with slow, quiet indifference. I started imagining what life would be like if I left David for Jake. Freedom, passion, someone who actually saw me. But fantasies have a way of crashing into reality. It happened on a Thursday evening in March. I was supposed to be at a work dinner, but I was actually at Jake's apartment. We'd been talking about me leaving David, about starting fresh together. I was drunk on the possibility of a new life. I got home around midnight expecting David to be asleep. Instead, he was sitting at our kitchen table with my laptop open, my work laptop, where I'd been careless enough to leave my personal email logged in. One look at his face, and I knew my world was about to end. Who's Jake? His voice was so calm, so controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. I tried to lie at first, stammered something about him being a colleague, just a friend. But David had read everything. 3 months of flirty texts, romantic emails, hotel receipts from our weekend getaway that I'd claimed was a work conference. "How long?" he asked, still in that eerily calm voice. When I whispered 3 months, I watched something die in his eyes. The love, the trust, the respect, it all just vanished, like watching a light switch being turned off. He didn't yell, He didn't throw things. He just sat there, processing the magnitude of my betrayal. Then he said the words that will haunt me forever. "Pack a bag. You can stay at your sister's tonight. We'll figure out the rest later." I started crying then, ugly sobbing that made it hard to breathe. I begged him to talk to me, to let me explain, but he just walked upstairs, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our marriage. The next few days were a blur of desperate phone calls and texts. David wouldn't answer, wouldn't respond. Finally, after a week of silence, he agreed to meet me at our house to discuss logistics. I thought this was my chance. I bought his favorite wine, cooked his favorite meal, wore the dress I'd worn on our first anniversary. I had this fantasy that he'd see how sorry I was, how much I loved him, and we'd find a way to work through it. But the man who walked into our house wasn't the David I'd married. He was cold, distant, businesslike. When I started crying and apologizing, he just stared at me with this look of complete indifference. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about growing apart, about not being happy. You're right. We haven't been connecting. But instead of talking to me about it, instead of suggesting counseling or working on our marriage, you decided to spread your legs for some kid at work." The words hit me like a physical blow. David had never spoken to me like that before, never been crude or cruel, but he wasn't done. "I've talked to a lawyer," he continued. "I'm filing for divorce. I'm keeping the house, and you can have half of everything else. I think that's more than generous considering what you've done." I fell to my knees then, literally collapsed on our kitchen floor. I grabbed his legs, begging him to forgive me, to give us another chance. I promised I'd never see Jake again, promised I'd do counseling, promised I'd do whatever it took. He looked down at me with such disgust that I felt physically sick. "Get up," he said quietly. "You're embarrassing yourself." When I didn't move, when I kept clinging to him and sobbing, he said the words that shattered what was left of my soul. "I'm not going to let some 304 destroy my life any more than she already has. The marriage is dead. You killed it. Now let go of me and have some dignity." I'd never heard him use that word before. I barely knew what it meant, but the way he said it, the contempt in his voice, made it clear it was something terrible. Something that's what he thought of me now. I let go of his legs and watched him walk away. That was 4 months ago. The divorce was finalized last week. David moved on faster than I thought possible. I heard through mutual friends that he's already dating someone new. Jake? He lost interest the moment I became available. Turns out he was more excited by the forbidden nature of our affair than by me as a person. He's moved on to some other woman at work. Probably married, too. I'm 38 years old, starting over in a studio apartment, trying to rebuild relationships with friends who've lost respect for me. My family still speaks to me. But there's this distance now, this disappointment they can't quite hide. The worst part isn't losing David, though that pain is unbearable. The worst part is knowing I did this to myself. I had a good man who loved me, and instead of working on our problems, I chose the easy, selfish path. I chose the excitement of something new over the commitment of something real. If you're reading this and thinking about having an affair, let me save you the trouble. It's not worth it. The temporary thrill of being desired by someone new doesn't compare to the lifetime of regret that follows. The fantasy of being forgiven, of having your spouse fight for you, of love conquering all. It's just that, a fantasy. Some things, once broken, can never be fixed. Some words, once spoken, can never be taken back. And some betrayals cut so deep that they don't just end marriages, they end the person you used to be. I'm not that person anymore. I'm not David's wife. I'm not Jake's exciting secret. I'm not even sure who I am. I'm just someone who learned too late that actions have consequences, and some mistakes cost you everything that actually matters. The scariest part? Even knowing all of this, even living with the consequences every single day, there's still a part of me that remembers how alive Jake made me feel, and that terrifies me more than anything else. The possibility that I might be the kind of person who could do this again, but I won't get the chance. David made sure of that when he called me what I am. And maybe that's exactly what I deserve to hear.